Good morning or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. My name is Ken Liu, and I am the director of the Christian Legal Aid Program at the Christian Legal Society. Our program has a network of about 50 Christian legal aid organizations providing faith-based legal services to the poor in over 130 communities across the country. If you would like to learn more about our Christian legal aid program, I welcome you to contact me anytime at my email address, kliu@clsnet.org. That's kliu@clsnet.org. Today, we are very pleased to have with us Professor Peter Robinson. He's a professor of law at the Pepperdine University Law School, and he directed their dispute resolution there for several decades and recently completed the book called Apology, Forgiveness, and Reconciliation for Good Attorneys and Other Peacemakers. That is based on a course that he teaches at the school. Those of you who are involved in legal aid know that many legal aid issues involve conflicts, often leading to bitterness and anger, especially when it's in a personal context, such as in family law situations. And I didn't realize how little I actually understood about apologies and forgiveness until I read Professor Robinson's book. There is actually so much depth and nuance to apologies and forgiveness, in which if we learn to understand it, I think will make us much better at helping serve Christian legal aid clients and helping ourselves to be better human beings just in our own personal lives. So with that, I want to thank Professor Robinson for being with us today. And a real quick note, if you have any questions for Professor Robinson, feel free to ask it by clicking on the question mark icon on your app, and we will probably take those questions at the end as time allows. Thanks, Professor Robinson.
Thank you, Ken. And thank those of you who have made the time to join us in this conversation. I'll let you know that I've been a professor at Pepperdine for 30 years and largely teaching negotiation and mediation and dispute resolution. And about 10 years ago, I was convicted of the fact that, you know what, we've missed the soul. We've missed the heart of it all. We can help people reach agreements and solve problems, but we've missed the healing. So I was drawn towards, let me spend some time as far as trying to study the things that will lead to healing. And I ended up coming up with apology and forgiveness and then reconciliation. That's kind of the result of those two things. So as I started doing the study and trying to learn as much as I could in preparation to create the class, I was really drawn to the whole idea that, I teach at a law school. Here we are, the Christian Legal Society, that lawyers, if we take seriously the idea of counselor at law, Warren Burger, Chief Justice Warren Burger, had the famous quote that we as lawyers should be healers of conflict, and thus the whole opportunity, not an obligation, but the opportunity that maybe we should be experts at the building blocks of healing. And I propose to you that as I've done the study, I believe we're going to find that it's going to point us in the direction of apology and forgiveness. And when those things can come together, hopefully reconciliation. I want you to know, as far as scriptural perspective on that, Matthew 5:23-24 says, if you're offering your gift at the altar and remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift at the altar and go and seek reconciliation. Notice with me in this situation, we're looking at a situation where somebody has something against you, and then yet we're called to go seek resolution, reconciliation of that. If someone has an accusation against me, if I hear them out, I might understand why they're mad at me. And now, if we're going to reconcile, I'm going to have to apologize. Similarly, Proverbs 15:1 says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger." When I think about a gentle answer, I think of a person who humbles him or herself and apologizes for mistakes that they've made. I think that de-escalates everything. And for most people, not everyone, there might be some people to where You humble yourself and you apologize and you do a great job at it. And they're just not at a place. They're not ready to forgive and to heal. They're still traumatized. So on the forgiveness side, Luke 11:14, gives us the Lord's Prayer. And when Jesus taught us to pray, he included the concept, forgive us our debts or our trespasses as we forgive, our debtors or those who trespass against us. And at the end of the Lord's Prayer, he says, if you don't forgive people, the Lord won't forgive you. And that message is also reinforced in Matthew 18:21, the parable of the unmerciful servant, where we receive such grace and such forgiveness and such a gift of immense magnitude from God, but he expects us to be stewards and to be stewards of his grace. Let me keep moving on here. As far, another verse in this orbit is Romans 12:18. As far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. So let me start to jump in. I have to tell you, last 10 years, I've been able to teach a whole semester-long class on apology, forgiveness, and reconciliation. And now I'm trying to rush through as much as I can in an hour. I'm sorry if there are obvious gaps that are frustrating. I will save 10 minutes at the end for you to be able to ask questions, and we'll go back and touch in on things. But let me start with some beginning concepts here, including what is apology? And frankly, what is the meaning behind apology? As I was doing my study, I ended up identifying two variables. Am I willing to admit that my behavior harmed someone? So we have the concept of harm, right? And am I willing to admit that my behavior was wrong? When both of those are present, we're out here on the chart to where I'm willing to admit both that I did something that hurt you and it was wrong for me to do it. Now we're out here on the chart, and the title I have for that is remorse apology. So as we look at remorse apology, I think that is often the default mechanism, the default meaning, that if someone says, I'm sorry, you're assuming that they are acknowledging and admitting that, yes, I understand that I did something that hurt you, and I'm willing to condemn myself. I'm willing to say I shouldn't have done it. That was not right, not the right thing to do, either on a moral, an ethical, a spiritual basis. On some measure, I'm willing to condemn my behavior, and so if I'm condemning my own behavior, I have remorse for having acted that way. All right, so there is one picture of apology. But I have to tell you, in my travels as a mediator and largely as a mediator, but the fact is that in my travels, sometimes when I'm talking to people about their behavior and the other person's asking for an apology, what I hear a lot of the time is, but I didn't do anything wrong. So for example, recently I mediated a partnership dissolution, and one of the partners says, you know what, the organization that we created has grown and has become so successful that what the other person used to contribute is not needed anymore on a partnership level. I can hire a staff person at a fraction of the cost. The fact is, you know what, the partnership doesn't make economic sense anymore, right? Well, the other person says, you can't end our partnership. And the other person says, yeah, yes, I can. Now, the person who's ending the partnership is not willing to say that he's doing something wrong because he doesn't believe he is, right? But he is willing to admit that I know that my decision to end our partnership is going to be disruptive. In fact, it will probably, lower your standard of living. And now we have another possible meaning. Maybe I can apologize without admitting wrongdoing. I can admit that my decisions, that I have not done anything wrong to make decisions about my life in this situation. But the fact is that still my decisions are gonna be hurtful to you, and therefore I call it a regret apology. Boy, I'll tell you, this I didn't do anything wrong is an important concept when we're trying to dissect, what are the dynamics going on in apology, and the question of, is this a confession of wrongdoing, or is this acknowledgement of harm and confession of wrongdoing, or is it only an acknowledgement of harm, but yet, there's no wrong in the equation. And now we have two different meanings that might be intended when a person says, I'm sorry. And now we might have some situations to where neither one of these, that the person, you're at a family gathering and you dare to make, in this day and age, a political joke, and don't you know that someone takes great offense, and now everyone is nervous as far as, oh my gosh, you know, what's going to happen? Is Uncle Joe going to leave Thanksgiving dinner mad? And we all have feel the pain of our alienation. And often the person who made the joke and offended someone, the fact is he doesn't really believe that his comment should have offended someone. The person was overly sensitive and he didn't believe the comment was wrong, right? But yet he is willing to apologize for the sake of social harmony. I guess, you know, we can maybe relate to a social harmony apology as far as close relationships in our marriages. And there's times to where, you know what, I believe what I said, and you know, and you're mad at me for saying it, but it's my truth. And you know what? There are times, at least for many of us, to where this social harmony apology essentially communicates, I care more about you than I do about being right. I think I'm right, if you want to know the truth. So my apology is not a retraction of my position, but you know what? I'm willing to say I apologize because I love you, and our relationship is more important than winning this conversation. And now we have another meaning. And frankly, you know, to look at this and to stand back and realize that when we say, when a person says, I'm sorry, it can mean very, very different things, depending on a lot of variables as far as what that person is intending to communicate. So when you give an apology, is it important for you to be clear, to tell the person, I want you to know, I'm sorry, and I mean that I know I hurt you and it was wrong, or are you going to be transparent and say, I want you to know, I think I'm right. I don't have any guilt over what I said. I don't have any regret. In fact, I still believe that, but I'm going to apologize so that we can move forward with this relationship. And that may not be a very satisfying apology, but yet here we are, start trying to dissect apologies so that we can all, as lawyers, help other people get through their crises and their conflicts or problems. So we have three main schools of thought here, and I want those to be in play as you think about encouraging others to apologize. So now I want to look at motives for apology, and this is another way to dig down and try and understand, you know, what are the dynamics here, what's happening, and what are we going to do about it. There are two categories. There's internal and there's external motives. In the internal motives, the people who write about this identify two things. It could be empathy, that is the driver that causes a person to be motivated to apologize. But the one that I found more interesting was guilt, that my own conscience indicts me. My own conscience says, geez, Peter, that wasn't nice. That wasn't golden rule. You wouldn't want to be treated that way. And now my conscience says, you really messed that up, Pete. And now I have to figure out, what am I going to do about that? And I want to let you know, the people who write about this, many of them are mental health professionals, and they say that unresolved guilt is a very big deal. You're playing with fire as far as your emotional health, your psychological health. So how do we resolve our guilt? Well, we have three choices from what I've read here. One of them is to pretend. We pretend it didn't happen. Have you ever shown up late for a lunch appointment? You're 10 minutes late, right? And you walk in. When you walk in, you don't acknowledge the fact that you're late. You don't look at your watch, say, I have a watch. I look at it and I know I'm 10 minutes late. And I'm sorry. You don't do that. Instead, you sit down at the table and you say, you know what? The chicken enchiladas at this place are to die for. And you move right into the conversation and you just kind of pretend like you're not 10 minutes late. So that's an option. The people who you know, help us think about that become concerned, because after a while, we're not only pretending to others, we're pretending to ourselves. And I think that's part of where they get the denial. You're in denial when you're pretending to yourself as compared to being more transparent with yourself. All right, well, if you don't pretend, you can also rationalize. And as lawyers, I think there's a professional hazard, isn't it? That we have been equipped. How can I construct this story to put it in the best possible light? And here we have a situation to where my conscience indicts me, and the very simplistic rationalization is to say, well, Peter, maybe you need to apologize. That is the third possibility as far as what do we do with our guilt. You know what? We apologize. But before we get there, I don't want to apologize, and we'll look at why in a minute. But because I don't want to apologize, you know what? There's a voice in my head that says, well, it wasn't that bad, right? Or everybody does it. And because of those two reasons, it's kind of like, should I apologize? It's kind of, well, you know what? That would be awkward, and et cetera, et cetera. And now suddenly I'm explaining to myself why I don't need to, and why when my conscience indicts me, my defense mechanisms click in and say, well, let's not make a big deal out of it. And there you are, kind of trying to pick, what do I do with this voice in my head? Now, again, the idea of apologizing is our third option, which frankly also raises the fact that the apology, we tend to think of the apology as something that we do for the victim. But now we realize that there's a very selfish reason to apologize. Because if in fact you believe that you have acted badly, if you apologize, that is the healthiest way to attend to your guilt. It's almost an act of, it's a gift to the perpetrator to kind of say, you know what, I screwed up. Okay, great. Now I'm going to apologize. And now I have two voices in my head. I messed up, and I told the truth, and I took care of it by the apology, as compared to either pretending or rationalizing. So in any event, here we have three choices as far as internal. And as we look at these three options, why is the apology hard? And I think the apology is hard because when we look at what the apology is, one soundbite definition that I love from the reading was, tell the truth to yourself and others, and take responsibility for it, right? Take the truth to yourself and others. Which of those is harder? For many of us, it's to tell the truth to ourselves. That to be honest with myself, and to be willing to move beyond my defense mechanisms. Again, don't forget, right now we're talking about just understanding the dynamics in apology, but the reason we are is because we're lawyers, and we have people that we are serving, and they're telling us what happened, and as they're telling us, we're realizing there's some things that our client didn't handle well, and now what is he or she going to do about those things? And one option is to encourage our clients to be honest with themselves about ways that they've contributed to this situation, and for them to, in the 12-step program, they talk about cleaning up your side of the street, and are you willing to tell the truth to yourself and the other person, and take responsibility for the mistakes that you've made? So there's a whole pathway that deals with the internal motivations for apology. Now, the external motivation is only to mitigate consequences. That this person doesn't have a conscience; they're a sociopath. So now, but yet they still might be motivated to apologize. And it has nothing to do with remorse or regret or social harmony. All they care about is that if I don't apologize, there will be consequences to my bad act that I want to mitigate them. A 3-year-old child knows that as they're about to be disciplined, you will often hear them with their parent, as they're being led away. It's kind of like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, and they know that, okay, you know what, that being sorry, contrition, is usually a good mitigator for whoever might be in a position to punish. And so now we sit back and we say, okay, we have remorse apology, we have regret apology, we have social harmony apology, and now when you add in the category of externally motivated apology, to apologize just to avoid consequences, it's kind of like, when a person apologizes, is that the beginning of the conversation or the end? Sometimes people say, I apologize, the conversation's over, right? But now we're actually having the tools to kind of dig down and say, hold on here. An apology in the English language is so complicated that, I need to have a few follow-up questions to find out why you're apologizing and what meaning you're trying to create. So there's some more thinking about apology. As we look at it, there's a question of, okay, if I work my way through all of that and I decide to apologize, what's a good apology? What's a bad apology? And Aaron Lazar was a psychiatrist who also an academic, and his work often had to do between physicians and patients. But as he was just working through apologies, he came up with the observation that sometimes a person decides to apologize, but their execution at the 11th hour, at the last minute, the way the words come out, actually, he calls it a verbal sleight of hand, that they sabotage an apology by the way they do it. So here's one model for how to apologize, right? And he says 4 steps: acknowledge what you did, right? And he said this is a place where people sometimes, and I think unintentionally sometimes, but they're trying to save some dignity. Instead of saying I'm an idiot, they're trying to somehow not have to admit that to themselves and to others. So he says if you're going to do an acknowledge, do not be vague. Have you ever heard an apology say, sorry about that thing, sorry about, just sorry, sorry for everything? And now again, the alternative would be specificity, right? I'm sorry that I got frustrated and that I lost my composure and I lost a sense of professionalism, and that I raised my voice to a loud tone, and then I used, I called you a name that was hurtful, that was dehumanizing. And the fact is that, that's what I want to apologize for that path that I got frustrated, I lost my temper, and I yelled at you, and I said things that were not kind. And now instead of sorry about that thing, the listener has a chance to hear me identify what I think I did wrong. And frankly, the listener is listening for, do we have shared values? Sometimes when I have a whole semester long class, after about 4 weeks, I have it's usually a woman who comes in, who's in the class, and after 3 or 4 weeks, she says, "I want you to know my boyfriend hates that I'm taking this class." And we say, "Okay, why?" Well, because before we took the class, he would do something stupid. I would get mad at him, and he would apologize, and I would accept his apology. But now that I've taken this class, he apologizes, and I have lots more questions about, and he goes, well, in fact, the question that she asked sometimes was, okay, what are you apologizing for? And he says, I don't know. I know you're mad at me, and I don't know. No, one of the measures of an apology is a question: will the behavior be repeated? And if the apologizer is not able to articulate what he or she did that was inappropriate, then how in the world are we going to possibly know that the behavior won't be repeated? So this idea of vague apology as compared to specificity, right? Here's trying to acknowledge it, right? Another cardinal do not do is the conditional apology. If that hurt your feelings, I'm sorry, right? Or I'm sorry if it hurt your feelings. To put any kind of conditions on it is missing the mark, because it's actually indicting the victim. It's accusing them of being overly sensitive, thin-skinned. And here you are. I'll just say it with a little spice in language, right? Okay, if that hurt your feelings, I will be the bigger person and I'll apologize. And it is demeaning to the person that you're supposedly apologizing to. One of the dynamics in apology, one of the psychological needs that's met in apology is restoring the dignity of the victim. So if we have a relationship, if I do something that disrespects you, I elevate myself and I humiliate you. And if I don't apologize, I ratify the fact that I think I'm entitled to treat you that way. I lost my temper and yelled at you. Guess what? That's who I am, and that's how I treat people. And if you don't like it, then you don't want to be in a relationship with me. Okay. But notice with me, if in fact I recognize that that's not who I am, I have an aspirational self that holds myself to a higher standard, and then I have the me that sometimes comes out, and that person's not a very nice person. So if I can make two of me, so an aspirational me and an actual me sometimes. Now again, if I see behavior that I'm willing to say that is wrong and I'm willing to self-condemn, the remorse apology, if I give that apology, I tell the person, you know what, I made a mistake. I was wrong. All of these things are acts of self-humiliation. And this is why most of us hate doing this, because we don't like to humble ourselves. We don't like to be, maybe you do, but I know I hate it. And we don't like to be vulnerable. And now I give power to the other person. I restore their dignity. I give them power over me. What power have I given them? The power to either accept the apology and to grant forgiveness or not. And now I'm waiting for their response. If they say, Peter, thank you for apologizing. That did hurt my feelings. It did damage our relationship. But because you have apologize for it, I now know we have shared values, that that's not how we should treat each other, and that you don't intend to treat me that way again, and that this behavior should not be repeated, because you're agreeing with me that your aspirational self says that, you know what, that behavior is inappropriate. So this whole idea of the conditional apology, it says if you're needy, I'll apologize, as compared to me saying, you know what, it doesn't even matter whether it hurt your feelings. I think that my behavior was below the standard I expect of myself. It was not the golden rule, and I aspire to treat others the way I want to be treated. My faith calls me to that, and I screwed up. So okay, there's a third way that people dodge the ball at the last minute here. That is to minimize. You're about to acknowledge what you did, but you use language like this. Well, it really isn't that big of a deal, but I'm sorry. Okay, it's a double, hold on here. Is it a big deal or not? And so the idea of saying, you know what, let me not minimize it. In fact, I had a recent experience to where the person maximized it and caused me to be more willing to forgive them because they were punishing themselves so severely. And it was a commercial situation. A company ran my credit card twice, and when I saw my credit card bill, I notified them. The person says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. This is terrible." And they, I said, I'm delighted that you're taking this seriously and that you want to correct it and make sure it doesn't happen to other people. But all I want you to do is reverse one of the charges and just charge me once, and I'm fine. You don't have to, you don't have to put a nail through your hand because this happened. But because they were making a bigger deal out of it than I was making, and because they were so hard on themselves, my instinct was to say, you know what, I don't need to punish them because they're punishing themselves. Now, the contrast is if we're in a situation where someone does something that disrespects you or takes advantage of you in some way, and then they say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And now, at least my instinct as a human being is like, you know what? You didn't have very good parents, did you? Someone needs to teach you a lesson. This is not how you treat people. And then I begin to think, maybe I'm supposed to teach them a lesson. Maybe that's why that's my mission on earth today from God, to teach these people a lesson. Well, we know the scripture is replete with verses that says, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." So I'm probably not the person to teach that person a lesson, but there are times where I think God would have us stand up and confront injustice. But the fact is, long and short, is that in this situation, when you're giving an apology or encouraging another person to give an apology, if you encourage them to not minimize it, it lets the other person know that you're taking it seriously. Fair enough. All right, the last one of these is the passive voice. The passive voice says mistakes were made. It's like the universe somehow came together to where this just happened. The active voice says, I made a mistake. And again, it's my pride. It's the fact that I don't want to humble myself that causes me to maybe, when I finally muster up to say, okay, let me go give an apology, I end up messing it up because through one of these ways. Okay. All right. So now we're standing here. Second piece, acknowledge and then express remorse. Express, I want you to know, I hate that I did this. This is, I know that sometimes I have a bad temper. Sometimes I lose my composure. Sometimes I go off the handle. And you know what? This is a part of me that I'm asking God to change, and I'm trying to change. And I just want you to know, I know this is, and for you to express your own disdain for that part of you, and that you would do something so insensitive or inconsiderate. And there you are having shared values. I want you to know, don't forget we started by talking about a whole bunch of different kinds of apologies. You can express remorse honestly if in fact it's a remorse apology. But if it's a regret apology or a social harmony apology, I think sometimes instead of remorse, we might express forbearance. I want you to know, I understand that I used a phrase that was very hurtful to you. I want you to know that that phrase was used in my family all the time, and it wasn't this terribly hurtful thing. I realize now that it is something that's incredibly offensive to you, and I want you to be clear with you. I will not use that phrase in our conversations again. Right. And notice the promise of forbearance going forward is not remorse. I'm not willing to say it's wrong, but I understand that for you it's hurtful, and because of my desire to have a respectful relationship to you and to be loving to you and to be edifying to you, I will not do that behavior again to you. Okay. Maybe an explanation. The explanation is dangerous because it could turn into a justification or an excuse. So if you're going to explain context, I hope that you will bookend it with the phrase of, I want you to know my behavior is not excusable. It should not happen and it was wrong. I think part of the reason that I did such a stupid thing was because my child was in the hospital the night before and I hadn't gotten sleep for 48 hours. So my behavior is wrong, and the reason that I acted wrongly, and there you are, notice it's kind of like, well, my kid was in the hospital. Of course I was short and lost my temper. No, it's not. Don't give an excuse, because the whole idea here is to condemn the behavior and communicate shared values. All right. Here's giant, folks. The last part of these 4 steps here is an offer of reparations. An apology is not supposed to take the place of reparations, and especially as we think about us as lawyers, right? People come to us wanting justice and fairness, and for us to know that if the other side's apologizing, that's not a get out of jail free card. It's acknowledging that you made a mistake, and now the fact is we have to have a conversation about what was the impact of that mistake, and again, if you're given the apology, I hope that they don't have to extract reparations out of you. I hope that you make the first offer and that you say, we know we messed up here. You know what? We feel very bad about it. It's not cool. Not the organization we want to be. You know what? I think that part of the reason that this happened was because we had a staff change and some people didn't understand. So, part of our value system and our tradition. And here's how we intend to make it right. And this idea of including reparations and offer reparations in the apology. Talk is cheap. The question is, if you are going to take responsibility, are you going to own it all the way? Okay. And now we get to the question of advising others. You're a lawyer, and now advising other people to take an apology, to make an apology as a lawyer. And I want to suggest we talk about this on 2 levels: pragmatic and a moral level. On the pragmatic level, I want to create a contrast. Well, what are the risks of apologizing? And what are the risks of not apologizing? I want you to know, as I have my law students, I say, okay, here's something that happened. How many of you would advise your client to apologize? And like, no, our culture is deny and defend. Our job is to, they have to prove up their case. And frankly, if I apologize, if I advise my client to apologize, am I admitting liability? This might be admissible in court, and now my apology becomes part of the reason that that I'm found responsible for this, and that is a giant risk to the apology. Now, frankly, if liability is clear and they're going to prove it other ways, what if we? But you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. The reason I think we, as most of us as lawyers, have a bias against apology is that we're concerned about admitting liability. And the second one is, what about insurance? In the complicated world in which we live, if I apologize and take responsibility, if I run a stop sign and get out of the car and say, I'm so sorry, I didn't see the stop sign, I'll take full responsibility. I call my insurance company and tell them about the whole situation, and then I tell them what I said at the accident scene. They say, well, Mr. Robinson, your contract of insurance requires you to partner with us to defend the claim. And when you got out and said that you would take full responsibility, well, good luck with that, because, it's not fair for you to take responsibility when we're the one writing the check. So we're not going to write the check if you are going to get out and say, I'll take full responsibility. Now, again, some of the people who've written about this, Jonathan Cohen has a great law review article advising your clients to apologize. And he says that, you can get out of the car and you can state the truth. I didn't see the stop sign. But you got to stop short of saying, I'll take full responsibility. That's not your checkbook that you're dealing with there. It's not right for you to do that. But as we think about encouraging people to apologize, what are the insurance ramifications, is an important consideration for us as lawyers. Fair enough. Now I want you to know, most law students, and I think many lawyers, that's all they think about. And they don't think about anything else. And if all we think about is what are the risks of doing this, well, you know what? It's not a full analysis. So for example, what's the risk of putting money in the stock market? Well, you might lose money. And if that's the extent of your analysis, you're not going to ever buy stocks, right? However, what's the risks of not putting your money in the stock market? Well, inflation might eat away at whatever resources you have. And therefore, $100 today is only going to buy you $50 worth of goods 10 years from now. So the economists will say that if you put your money in the stocks, it goes up and down, but over time, it generally, has a 5% return. Inflation tends to be 3%. Your wealth is good. So notice with me, the decision whether you're going to invest in stocks or not, you need to ask, what are the risks, and be intellectually honest, right? And also ask, what are the risks of not investing in the stock market, and be intellectually honest with that conversation also. And that's part of what I hope might be really interesting to you as lawyers, right? If you've not thought about it, the risks of not apologizing. And then you're going to balance these two things against each other. So the risk of not apologizing is committing a second injury. The first injury that I perpetrate is I was texting while driving. Okay, that is not legal in California, and it's not considerate, and it's negligence. Okay, so my first injury was being negligent, right? The second injury is not apologizing, not telling the truth, and taking responsibility. And sometimes the other person, will see that and get mad, and madder. They're not, he not only was negligent, but then he got out of the car and he pretended like he didn't do anything wrong. What a jerk! Which frankly brings this increase of likelihood of being sued. This has been well documented in the medical field, to where a physician makes an error, but he's afraid of being sued, so he withdraws from the patient. Right? The patient experiences this and says, you know what? I think he made an error, but he either doesn't know or doesn't care, and whichever of those it is, it makes me madder at him or her, right? And don't you know, now it's kind of like as they're sorting through what's their appropriate response, it's kind of like someone needs to teach them a lesson, and now they're more inclined to go talk to a lawyer and to bring the suit. So the doctor unintentionally created the response he was trying to avoid. So this idea of the second injury of not apologizing when people make mistakes, and increasing the likelihood of being sued. Also, indignity is a barrier to serious settlement. If a person's mad about who they think you are and how you're acting, to say, well, let's just see if we can come to some kind of resolution here. Their anger, their emotion about maybe the second injury. Another soundbite is that many people can forgive a mistake, but they won't forgive a cover-up. And now you're in that situation of saying, okay, we messed up here. Am I gonna come clean and take responsibility and pay appropriate reparations, or am I going to try and try and keep the lid on this thing? Okay, so here you go. And by the way, another risks of not apologizing is to look bad to the eventual whoever's going to be in a position of authority to determine what seems fair about this situation. A judge, a jury, some kind of administrative, whoever is if you're in the workplace, the boss. And the fact is, when people make a mistake and they apologize, I think that they have credibility, and I think that they're sympathetic and they're perceived as a decent human being. When people make a mistake and then deny and defend, even in irrational ways, I think that when a judge or a jury or whoever, the boss, is going to get involved and administer justice here, the person who didn't apologize starts off with has a strike against them as far as that the judge's perception. I think this is illustrated. I don't have time to. I started in Los Angeles Times about 6 months ago. They had an article by a lawyer who was talking about the government is now bringing a bunch of investigations against Google and the big tech companies. And the article talked about, maybe these lawyers will learn from what happened in the Microsoft case. And in the Microsoft antitrust case, the lawyers from Microsoft, at least as it was described in this LA Times article, that they actually, one of the things that the government was asserting was that Microsoft was a dominant player in the industry. And the people from Microsoft said, sure, we have 90% of market share, but that doesn't make us dominant. And that the judge was having a hard time, keeping a straight face when these lawyers were trying to explain how, even though they had a 90% market share, that doesn't make us a dominant player in the market. And and again, the author of the LA Times article was saying, concede the points that are obvious, because you lose credibility when you don't. And when you stand back and say, deny everything, don't apologize, don't admit it, just a question of strategy, is that effective? The title of the book that Ken mentioned is Apology and Forgiveness and Reconciliation for Good Lawyers and Other Peacemakers. I teach a lot of mediation, so other peacemakers are mediators and ombuds and HR people and all. But the fact is, good lawyers, and does good mean that you are morally good or that you are effective? And I hope this pragmatic analysis just challenges us as lawyers to step back and say, okay, what are the risks of apologizing? What are the risks of not apologizing? And then on a case-by-case basis, think about, the advantages and benefits of both of these strategic options. Now, that's all a pragmatic analysis. I want to encourage us also to look at a moral analysis. That's a timer that tells me that I've got 15 minutes left, which tells me that I've got 5 minutes to teach, and then let you guys ask questions for 10 minutes. The other part of this is a moral analysis. And as we think about advising our client to apologize, the whole idea that your client may come to you and say, I know I made mistakes, and they have guilt. And now the question is, do we as a legal profession respect the fact that maybe the emotionally mental health, the healthiest approach to guilt is to apologize? Because if we say, oh, I know you have guilt, but go to a therapist or something, because I'm going to encourage you not to apologize here. Well, guilt is usually defined as an feeling convicted about an incident, right? So I told a lie, okay, is guilt, okay? And unresolved guilt turns into shame. And shame is not about an incident, it's about an identity. I'm a liar. And as we think about the moral dimension of the decision to make an apology, are we as lawyers encouraging our clients to act honorably and to give them at least a peace of mind. I made a mistake, but I acknowledged the mistake and I acted honorably after the mistake. I did everything humanly possible to be honest with myself and others, and to take responsibility for my behavior. And it isn't perfect, but it's the best I can do. Hold on. So for the attorneys, I want you to know, as far as balancing between giving an apology and not giving an apology, I want you to know you have apology statutes. About 30 states in the union have a statute that talks about whether an apology is admissible or not. So the whole idea of, should we give it the whole? Are we waiving liability? Well, guess what? You know what? You might have a statute in your state that says that you can make an apology, and that can't be used as evidence against you to prove your liability. But the statutes are different. So, for example, in California, the statutes use the language of in the situations of an accident. So in a business or an employment situation, it's not covered by the California statute. And also only statements of benevolence. You cannot admit guilt. You cannot give a remorse apology. You can give a regret or a social harmony apology, but you cannot give a remorse apology in California and think that you're going to be protected. If you admit wrongdoing, that will be admissible, right? The biggest contrast that I found is up in Canada and British Columbia. Their apology statute says that you can give in any situation, not just accidents, but in any situation, you can give an apology, and it can't be used to prove liability. And their statute says it also cannot affect your insurance coverage. So all that stuff about insurance coverage, there are some statutes that say that we want to encourage apology so much that we're going to tell insurance companies, if you want to write insurance in our jurisdiction, guess what? In our jurisdiction, our citizens can get out of the car and say they're sorry and that they messed up, and even take responsibility and all of that, and the insurance company still needs to provide the benefits designated. So but in addition to the apology statutes, there's also safe apology options as far as in a mediation. In most jurisdictions, mediation is confidential. What's said in mediation is not admissible in subsequent civil proceedings. And then again, a lawyer might encourage an early mediation so that the client can have a more transparent conversation about, what, if we get into the whole legal thing, we're gonna try and, we'll go down that path, and we'll try and try and be careful with what we say. But today we just want to let you know, we look at it, we think we made mistakes here. Our organization could have done better, should have done better, and we want to make it right. And there you are, owning the fact that you've made mistakes. In mediation, whatever confessions you make, cannot be used against you. Well, the other safe apology option is, what if the attorney apologizes? What if the attorney is the mouthpiece? And as you think about, how do I serve my clients? I want you to know this is not as good from the studies that have been provided. When the perpetrator apologizes, it is much better than having a spokesperson apologize. But sometimes the lawyer says, in this situation, I don't want him to admit any wrongdoing and apologize, because I don't want that to come back to bite him in some way. But for the lawyer to reach out to the other side and say, I want to let you know, here's an olive branch. We know mistakes have been made, and that our organization should have been on top of this better, and that they are sorry, and now suddenly you have a peace offering from a lawyer as part of settlement negotiations, and have it protected that way. But that assumes that you as a lawyer are comfortable in that role, and also that you have taken the time to be up to speed as far as, am I the right person to have the conversation about apologizing? You know what? We promised apology and forgiveness, and time is such that that we've gotten through the apology, and there's 10 minutes left. I hope that you don't feel it's bait and switch about forgiveness. I would just let you know that on the forgiveness side, that when we are representing people who either are defendants and have been accused of doing wrong, or people who have maybe it's a moneyed situation to where everybody has some blame for this mess. Now we're in a position of encouraging our clients to apologize. frankly, I think it's mainly the plaintiff bar that has to figure out, you know what, I got my client the money that they're entitled to under the law. But what I didn't do is that they are still an emotional train wreck. And the stories that I hear from friends is that, you know what, I got a great outcome from my client, but the last thing they told me is that, yeah, well, that's good, but I'm still so mad. And for us as Christian lawyers to especially encourage our clients to say, you know what, I will work to get you you've been harmed financially and emotionally. I will work to get you your financial recovery, and I will encourage you to at least begin a journey of emotional recovery, and that we can do that early in a case, we can do that in the middle of a case, we can do that at the end of a case, but that for us to also have a sensitivity and a methodology about how do I encourage my clients to heal after they've been victimized. So we'll do more. If you want to, your questions can go more towards forgiveness, and I'll go into more of that. But at this point, let me just kind of pause and see if there are questions that you want to ask about the apology.
Are you apologizing for not being able to talk about forgiveness?
Pardon?
Are you apologizing for not talking about forgiveness?
Yes, but I want you to know it's the remorse apology. But actually, you know, it's also a regret apology, because I wanted to give you the apology stuff with enough vigor that it would be useful to you. I hope that you've got something there that will be useful to you.
If anyone does have questions, feel free to ask them by using the question mark icon on your app. We do have one person who asked, Professor Robertson, is it possible to get a list of all of the apology statutes? Do you have that compiled somewhere?
I do not. It's whatever I mean, clearly, you know, what you need to do is you need to just look at your jurisdiction and figure out which of them will apply where you are. I have not done a comprehensive list of apology statutes.
Okay. So one question is, if you're in a state that does not have a specific apology statute, or if it's very limited, as I know a lot of states are, can you clarify what you suggest in terms of giving an apology? You're saying that based on your studies, it is possible to give a regret or a social harmony apology, and as long as you don't outright say you're remorseful, or that it is safe, or
No. If you don't have an apology statute, whatever you say at the accident scene, you know, might be evidence, and that the jury might actually take what you meant as an empathy or a social harmony apology, and they might attribute it to be a remorse apology, that you're taking responsibility. So if you don't have an apology statute, of course, now we're talking about lawyers advising clients. So you're in a more controlled environment than the accident scene, and now for you to need to say, you know what, I think an apology would help us get started towards resolution here. You know, what is a safe way to do that? And I think there's two safe ways that I've thought of. You know, one of them is to have the attorney be the spokesperson who's going to articulate, you know, the apology. The second one is, and frankly, for you to be, you know, transparent, you know, as far as, okay, by this apology, you know, what am I doing? What am I not doing? And you may need to say, you know what, I can't admit liability here, but I do want to let you know that that we wish we'd handled it. We're not willing to say that we violated the law, but we think we could have done better. And that your person's mad at us because of the way we treated them. You know what? If we have to, we'll let the court decide whether we violated the law. But you know what? We are sorry that we didn't treat them with love. The law doesn't require us to love them, but our values require us to extend love. So there is a form of an apology that an attorney, I think, might be able to give without giving away the farm as far as legal exposure. But the other one is to go to a mediation. And whether you have an apology statute or not, almost all the mediation statutes say that the mediation will be confidential. And now you can actually go and say, you know what, we feel bad that we handled the way we did. We should have handled it better. And frankly, we screwed up and we're sorry. And there you can really put cards on the table there. But the carefulness of trying to navigate the apology, if an attorney's given an apology without an apology statute, is something that requires some thought.
Another question is, from a relational perspective rather than a legal one, when is it ill-advised to give an apology?
Okay, I mean, there are people who are professional victims that if you apologize, they're not going to receive it. They're going to hold it over you. They're going to enjoy the power that you give them, and they're going to use it as a way to try and have dominance over you, right? Now the fact is that for me personally, other people can have to decide and choose and be accountable for their decisions and how they act. All I can do is do what I need to do for me to live the way I think God wants me to live. So even though I'm with a situation where I think a person is not going to respond in a constructive, positive way, I can't control the other person. All I can do is control me. So I would still say that if my conscience tells me that I did something wrong, I need to go make that right. I think that's what God calls me to do, to go make that right, even if the other person is going to behave badly. And I can then I can make count the cost. I can know that I'm going in to the situation in such a way that I'm not expecting a great outcome here and for kumbaya to be the final moment here. I'm expecting for me to humble myself, admit ways that I have wish I had behaved better, and for the other person to say yeah, and just to be meaner and uglier, kind of like, okay, I've done what I'm supposed to do, and then for me, I'll just disengage and the ball's in their court. And when they say, Peter, I want you to do this because I said, I offered you reparations, and what I thought was a fair acknowledgement for what I did, but that doesn't mean I'm indebted to you forever and supposed to do everything you want me to do. So relationally, if another person then now tries to manipulate me into doing other things for them, if I think that they're overreaching and they're trying to get more reparations than I think is appropriate, I'll be self-protective. I'm not sure that being self-protective is not a big theme in scripture, but that's my answer.
Okay. Well, I think we are just about out of time. One person did ask if we're able to offer CLE credit for this class, and now it's my turn to apologize. Unfortunately, we are not able to provide CLE credit. It is very costly and time-consuming to apply for CLE credit, especially when we have audience members from all over the country. One person did ask, how can they obtain a copy of your book? Well, I'm very pleased to announce that Professor Robinson has generously donated some limited copies. And so for those of you who are on this webinar, if you would like a free copy of his book, feel free to email me at kliu@clsnet.org, and we will be able to provide you with a free copy. Professor Robinson, this is wonderful. It's just a snapshot of everything that's in your book, but it gave us a great taste of just how nuanced and sophisticated apologies can be, and especially as lawyers who are advising others, I think it's important for us to really appreciate the power of apologies, and I hope that everybody who listened to this can apply what they learned today. So thank you very much.
Thank you for investing the time to join me in something that I think is important, and I hope that it was meaningful and helpful to you. Thank you.
Yes, and this webinar was recorded. We will be sending a copy of the recording to everyone who registered for this webinar. So if you want to share this with others, we welcome you to do so. Thank you very much, and hope everyone has a great day.